Queen Alexandra of Denmark was Queen of the United Kingdom and the British Dominions, and Empress of India, from the 22nd of January, 1901 to the 6th of May, 1910 as the wife of Edward VII. Princess Alexandra Caroline Marie Charlotte Louise Julia was born at the Yellow Palace, an 18th-century townhouse at 18 Amaliegade, immediately adjacent to the Amalienborg Palace complex in Copenhagen. Her immediate family knew her as Alex. Her father was Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glucksburg and her mother was Princess Louise of Hesse-Kassel. She had 5 siblings, Frederick, William, later George I of Greece, Dagmar, later Empress Maria of Russia, Thyra, and Voldemar. Her father's family was a distant cadet branch of the Danish royal house of Oldenburg, which was descended from King Christian III of Denmark. Although they were of royal blood, the family lived a comparatively modest life. They did not possess great wealth. Her father's income from an army commission was about £800 per year, and their house was a rent-free grace and favour property. Occasionally, Hans Christian Andersen was invited to call and tell the children stories before bedtime. In 1848 Christian VIII of Denmark died and his only son Frederick acceded to the throne. Frederick was childless, had been through 2 unsuccessful marriages, and was assumed to be infertile. A succession crisis arose because Frederick ruled in both Denmark and Schleswig-Holstein, and the succession rules of each territory differed. In Holstein, the Salic law prevented inheritance through the female line, whereas no such restrictions applied in Denmark. Holstein, being predominantly German, proclaimed independence and called in the aid of Prussia. In 1852 the major European powers called a conference in London to discuss the Danish succession. An uneasy peace was agreed, which included the provision that Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glucksburg would be Frederick's heir in all his dominions. Prince Christian was given the title Prince of Denmark and his family moved into a new official residence, Bernstorff Palace. Alexandra shared a drafty attic bedroom with her sister, Dagmar, made her own clothes, and waited at table along with her sisters. Alexandra and Dagmar were given swimming lessons by the Swedish pioneer of women's swimming, Nancy Edberg. At Bernstorff, Alexandra grew into a young woman. She was taught English by the English chaplain at Copenhagen and was confirmed in Christiansborg Palace. She was devout throughout her life, and followed high church practice. Given that Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, would reach the age of 20 in November 1861, his parents Queen Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert, were taking steps to find a bride for him. They enlisted the aid of their eldest, and already married, daughter, Crown Princess Victoria of Prussia, in seeking a suitable candidate. Alexandra was not their first choice because the Danes were at loggerheads with the Prussians over the Schleswig-Holstein question, and most of the British royal family's relations were German. Eventually, after rejecting other possibilities, they settled on her as the only one to be chosen. On the 24th of September, 1861, Crown Princess Victoria introduced her brother Albert Edward to Alexandra at Speyer. Almost a year later, on the 9th of September, 1862, Albert Edward proposed to Alexandra at the royal castle of Laeken, the home of his great-uncle, King Leopold I of Belgium. A few months later, Alexandra travelled from Denmark to Britain aboard the royal yacht Victoria and Albert and arrived in Gravesend, Kent, on the 7th of March, 1863. Thomas Longley, the Archbishop of Canterbury, married the couple on the 10th of March, 1863 at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. The choice of venue was criticised. As the ceremony took place outside London, the press complained that large public crowds would not be able to view the spectacle. Prospective guests thought it awkward to get to and, as the venue was small, some people who had expected invitations were disappointed. The Danes were dismayed because only Alexandra's closest relations were invited. The British court was still in mourning for Prince Albert, so ladies were restricted to wearing grey, lilac, or mauve. As the couple left Windsor for their honeymoon at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. By the end of the following year, Alexandra's father had acceded to the throne of Denmark, her brother William had become King George I of Greece, her sister Dagmar was engaged to Nicholas Alexandrovich, Cesarevich of Russia, and Alexandra had given birth to her first child. Her father's accession gave rise to further conflict over the fate of Schleswig-Holstein. The German Confederation successfully invaded Denmark, reducing the area of Denmark by 2/5. To the great irritation of Queen Victoria and the Crown Princess of Prussia, Alexandra and Albert Edward supported the Danish side in the war. The Prussian conquest of former Danish lands heightened Alexandra's profound dislike of the Germans, a feeling which stayed with her for the rest of her life. Alexandra's first child, Albert Victor, was born 2 months premature in early 1864. Alexandra showed devotion to her children. She was in her glory when she could run up to the nursery, put on a flannel apron, wash the children herself and see them asleep in their little beds. Albert Edward and Alexandra had 6 children in total: Albert Victor, George, Louise, Victoria, Maud, and Alexander. All of Alexandra's children were apparently born prematurely. Biographer Richard Hough thought Alexandra deliberately misled Queen Victoria as to her probable delivery dates, as she did not want the Queen to be present at their births. During the birth of her third child in 1867, the added complication of a bout of rheumatic fever threatened Alexandra's life and left her with a permanent limp. In public, Alexandra was dignified and charming. In private, affectionate and jolly. She enjoyed many social activities, including dancing and ice skating, and was an expert horsewoman and tandem driver. She also enjoyed hunting, to the dismay of Queen Victoria, who asked her to stop, but without success. Even after the birth of her first child, she continued to socialize much as before, which led to some friction between the Queen and the young couple, exacerbated by Alexandra's loathing of Prussians and the Queen's partiality towards them. Albert Edward and Alexandra visited Ireland in April 1868. After her illness the previous year, she had only just begun to walk again without the aid of 2 walking sticks, and was already pregnant with her 4th child. The royal couple undertook a 6-month tour taking in Austria, Egypt and Greece over 1868 and 1869, which included visits to her brother George I of Greece, to the Crimean battlefields and, for her only, to the harem of the Khedive Ismail. In Turkey she became the first woman to sit down to dinner with the Sultan, Abdulaziz. The couple made Sandringham House their preferred residence, with Marlborough House their London base. Biographers agree that their marriage was in many ways a happy one. However, some have asserted that Albert Edward did not give his wife as much attention as she would have liked and that they gradually became estranged, until his attack of typhoid fever. Throughout their marriage Albert Edward continued to keep company with other women, including the actress Lily Langtry, Daisy Greville, Countess of Warwick, humanitarian Agnes Keyser, and society matron Alice Keppel. Alexandra knew about most of these relationships and later permitted Alice Keppel to visit her husband as he lay dying. Alexandra herself remained faithful throughout her marriage. An increasing degree of deafness, caused by hereditary otosclerosis, led to Alexandra's social isolation. She spent more time at home with her children and pets. Her 6th and final pregnancy ended with the birth of a son in April 1871, but the infant died the next day. Despite Alexandra's pleas for privacy, Queen Victoria insisted on announcing a period of court mourning, which led unsympathetic elements of the press to describe the birth as a wretched abortion and the funeral arrangements as sickening mummery, even though the infant was not buried in state with other members of the royal family at Windsor, but in strict privacy in the churchyard at Sandringham, where he had lived out his brief life. Alexandra spent the spring of 1877 in Greece recuperating from a period of ill health and visiting her brother King George of Greece. During the Russo-Turkish War, Alexandra was clearly partial against Turkey and towards Russia, where her sister was married to the Tsarevich, and she lobbied for a revision of the border between Greece and Turkey in favor of the Greeks. Alexandra spent the next 3 years largely parted from her 2 sons as the boys were sent on a worldwide cruise as part of their naval and general education. The farewell was very tearful and, as shown by her regular letters, she missed them terribly. In 1881, Alexandra and Albert Edward traveled to St. Petersburg after the assassination of Alexander II of Russia, both to represent Britain and so that Alexandra could provide comfort to her sister Maria Feodorovna, who had become Tsarina. Alexandra undertook many public duties. She opens bazaars, attends concerts, visits hospitals in my place. She not only never complains, but endeavors to prove that she has enjoyed what to another would be a tiresome duty. She took a particular interest in the London hospital, visiting it regularly. Crowds usually cheered Alexandra rapturously, but during a visit to Ireland in 1885, she suffered a rare moment of public hostility when visiting the city of Cork, a hotbed of Irish nationalism. She and her husband were booed by a crowd of 2,000 to 3,000 people brandishing sticks and black flags. She smiled her way through the ordeal, which the British press still portrayed in a positive light, describing the crowds as enthusiastic. As part of the same visit, she received a doctorate in music from Trinity College Dublin. Alexandra was deeply saddened by the death of her eldest son, Prince Albert Victor, in 1892. His room and possessions were kept exactly as he had left them. Surviving letters between Alexandra and her children indicate that they were mutually devoted. In 1894, her brother-in-law Alexander III of Russia died and her nephew Nicholas II became Tsar. Alexandra's widowed sister, Dowager Empress Maria of Russia, lent heavily on her for support. Alexandra, who had gone to Russia accompanied by her husband, slept, prayed, and stayed beside Maria for the next 2 weeks until Alexander's burial. Alexandra and Albert Edward stayed on for the wedding of Nicholas to their niece Princess Alix of Hesse and by Rhine, who had taken the Russian name Alexandra Fyodorova and became the new Tsarina. With the death of her mother-in-law, Queen Victoria, in 1901, Alexandra became Queen Empress with her husband's accession as Edward VII. Just 2 months later, her son George and daughter-in-law Mary left on an extensive tour of the empire, leaving their young children in the care of Alexandra and Edward, who doted on their grandchildren. On George's return, preparations for Edward and Alexandra's coronation in Westminster Abbey were well in hand, but just a few days before the scheduled coronation in June 1902, the king became seriously ill with appendicitis. Alexandra deputized for him at a military parade and attended the royal ascot races without him, in an attempt to prevent public alarm. Eventually, the coronation had to be postponed and Edward had an operation performed by Frederick Treves of the London Hospital to drain the infected appendix. After his recovery, Alexandra and Edward were crowned together in August, the king by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Frederick Temple, and the Queen by the Archbishop of York, William Dalrymple Maclagan. Despite being queen, Alexandra's duties changed little, and she kept many of the same retainers. Alexandra's woman of the bedchamber, Charlotte Knollys, the daughter of Sir William Knollys, served Alexandra loyally for many years. On the 10th of December, 1903, Knollys woke to find her bedroom full of smoke. She roused Alexandra and shepherded her to safety. In the words of Grand Duchess Augusta of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, "We must give credit to old Charlotte for really saving Alexandra's life." Alexandra again looked after her grandchildren when George and Mary went on a second tour, this time to British India, over the winter of 1905-06. Her father, Christian IX of Denmark, died that January. Eager to retain their family links, both to each other and to Denmark, in 1907 Alexandra and her sister, Dowager Empress Maria, purchased a villa north of Copenhagen, Vidor, as a private getaway. In 1910, Alexandra became the first Queen Consort to visit the British House of Commons during a debate. In a remarkable departure from precedent, for 2 hours she sat in the Ladies' Gallery overlooking the chamber while the Parliament Bill, to remove the right of the House of Lords to veto legislation, was debated. Privately, Alexandra disagreed with the bill. Shortly afterwards, she left to visit her brother George in Corfu. While there, she received news that King Edward was seriously ill. Alexandra returned at once and arrived only the day before her husband died. In his last hours, she personally administered oxygen from a gas cylinder to help him breathe. Later that year she moved out of Buckingham Palace to Marlborough House, but she retained possession of Sandringham. The new king, Alexandra's son George V, soon faced a decision over the Parliament Bill. Despite her personal views, Alexandra supported her son's reluctant agreement to Prime Minister H. Asquith's request to create sufficient Liberal peers after a general election if the Lords continued to block the legislation. From Edward's death, Alexandra was Queen Mother, being a dowager queen and the mother of the reigning monarch. She did not attend the coronation of her son and daughter-in-law in 1911 since it was not customary for a crowned queen to attend the coronation of another king or queen, but otherwise continued the public side of her life, devoting time to her charitable causes. One such cause was Alexandra Rose Day, where artificial roses made by people with disabilities were sold in aid of hospitals by women volunteers. On the 17th of September, 1916, she was at Sandringham during a Zeppelin air raid, but far worse was to befall other members of her family. In Russia, her nephew Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown and he, His wife and their children were killed by revolutionaries. Dowager Empress Maria was rescued from Russia in 1919 by HMS Marlborough and brought to England, where she lived for some time with her sister Alexandra. Last years and death. Alexandra retained a youthful appearance into her senior years, but during the war her age caught up with her. She took to wearing elaborate veils and heavy makeup, which was described by gossips as having her face enameled. She made no more trips abroad, and her health worsened. In 1920, a blood vessel in her eye burst, leaving her with temporary partial blindness. Towards the end of her life, her memory and speech became impaired. She died on the 20th of November, 1925 at Sandringham House from a heart attack. Queen Alexandra lay in state at Westminster Abbey and was interred on the 28th of November next to her husband in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle.